In August 2016, I jumped on my computer to Google a good friend of mine from college, Blake King. My wife was sleeping in our bedroom, and I was in my office. I usually work in the middle of the night. It was midnight. And I was working on a project I knew he'd be really excited about. So I Googled him. I was really excited to find him. And instead of finding his Facebook page, I actually found his obituary. And I opened it up, and I couldn't believe it. But there was his face. There was his afro and his brilliant eyes and his big, beautiful smile. And he was staring at me like I'd always known him as this positive beacon of light in my life, this man who had changed my own life views in so many ways. And he was looking right into my eyes. And I couldn't believe he was dead. And it turned out that he took his life 6 years before. We had been emailing, and I thought that we had just drifted apart, but it turned out that I actually emailed him before and after he took his life. And I sat there and I started sobbing, and I sobbed for hours. And I couldn't believe that this amazing human being was gone forever. I'd never see him again. And it immediately jumped me back in time to well before I'd met Blake when I started college, to my first encounter with suicide. At the time, I had just moved out to college. My parents were going through a really, really messy divorce, and my little brother, Galen, was back home. And I knew he was having a really tough time. I mean, he was getting bullied in school. His name's Galen. That's not, really conducive to good times at school. And I knew that he was doing poorly academically. I knew that he wasn't being supported emotionally by my mom because she was a mess and couldn't take care of herself. And so I came back for one break, and it was the first time I started to notice that there was something different about him. This is my little brother. He used to annoy the crap out of me, 6 years younger. We never really, met up together, but he was a little less annoying, which was a worrying thing for me because it meant that he wasn't as engaged with me. And he was a little bit withdrawn. He was a little despondent. And I thought to myself, I got to get to the bottom of this. I love this guy. And in our family growing up, it was a very independent family. You basically did your own laundry at age 12, you made your own dinners at age 10, and you took care of all your own business. That was just kind of how we rolled. We didn't really talk about emotions. We'd rather instead just bottle them up really healthily and then explode over the Seahawks losing to the Broncos. So to do anything, to ask questions, to confront things was not our style. And to do what I did was basically akin to treason. So the next day, Galen goes out, probably with our mom, to go to the store, and I jumped on his computer. And his computer was in the living room, and I started typing away, and I was doing searches in his computer to figure out if he had written anything that I would read that would make me know that he wasn't well. And I started searching through file names, and nothing was coming up, and I thought, oh shit, he's my brother, he's smart. He's not going to name it with the title. I have to go look in hidden folders. I've got to look through the actual file contents, which was an option at the time. And I did. And I found it. I found a suicide note. I found a writing that talked about how he was so alone and nobody loved him and there was nothing for him and that he should just take his life and then it should all be over and it'd be better for everybody. And I lost it. I was confused. I was scared. I was terrified. I didn't know if I was on a timeline. I didn't know if he had plans. I was lost. I was angry. I was guilty. I was ashamed. How dare I go to college and leave him in this mess? What is wrong with me? And I did. The only thing I knew what to do, which was ask somebody else what to do. And I ended up eventually talking to a child psychologist that day who told me that I had to confront him. And in our family, that was almost a fate worse than death, but I knew that it was something I had to do. And he told me that you have to ask him directly, are you thinking of taking your life by suicide? And so I remember the next day, Galen was downstairs in his room, and I walked down the stairs to go talk to him, and I said to myself, this is going to be fucking awful. This is going to be so uncomfortable, but you have to do this. It wasn't something that I felt was enormous, but it was something that I felt was right. And I walked down the stairs, and the third stair creaked, and I got to the bottom of the hallway, and I could see his door was ajar, and I knew he knew I was coming because he heard the stair creak, and I came around the corner, I knocked on the door, and I said, hey, Galen, do you have a minute? Can we talk? And he looked at me very suspiciously, partly because obviously I was sweating, my heart rate was up, I looked a little probably ashen, and the truth is I had never asked him just to talk. And so I saw him mentally put his dukes up and say, yeah, come in, what's up? And I started the conversation with the only way that I knew how. The only rule in our house was always be honest. You can forgive anything, but if you don't tell the truth, you can't rebuild that trust. And so I told him, I said, I went through your computer and I found a suicide note and I need to talk to you about it. And I took my beating. He yelled at me, told me invasion of privacy. It's not okay to do this. It's not your right. This is my stuff. What's wrong with you? And I took it and I waited and I listened and I stopped when he was done. And I said, I just want you to know, I'm sorry I did it, but I love you. I love you deeply and I care about you. And I would miss you if you were gone. And are you planning on taking your own life? And he looked at me and he said, no. He said, no, I'm not. And we had a little bit more of a discussion, but at that point we were both pretty spent. We were both pretty exhausted. And so I left and we moved on. And it was this memory that had been brought back to me when I saw Blake's obituary. And I called Galen a couple of days later and I said, hey, you remember that time when I was in college and you were in high school and I confronted you? And he said, yeah, of course I remember that time. You went through my stuff. And I said, I think we need to talk about our story, Galen. I think we need to tell people what happened. I think people need to know what we've done. And I remember through a series of events, we ended up being able to set up an NPR interview. And we sat there in the NPR interview, and they've got the cool microphones, and Bill Radke's over here, and we're all going to be on radio. It's going to be amazing. And I'm looking over at Galen. He's wearing his snappy blazer because I told him to dress nice because they were taking a picture of us. And Bill Radke says, Galen, when Arthur came downstairs that day and asked you, are you thinking of taking your life? And he told you how much that you mean to him. What did you feel? And he was in this moment watching Galen articulate these incredibly deep and emotional and real and raw thoughts that I realized two things. One, I had actually never asked him what he felt about that day. I had no idea what he was going to say. And two, I listened to him say, having somebody ask me if I had a plan meant that I had to confront whether I was really thinking about this or whether this was just an idealization in my head. And knowing that I would be missed definitely made a difference. And Galen and I talked about it, and I realized that there were other parts of Galen's life that brought him out of what he was in. I was one of those puzzle pieces, and I may not have been the major one, but I did make a difference just by doing that. And I realized throughout this whole process that you don't need to do something huge to make an enormous difference. You just have to do what you think is right. Thank you.